Hi, my name is Colby Sharp. I'm a fifth grade teacher and co-host of the Yarn podcast. I had the amazing opportunity to chat with Lisa Fipps about her new book, And Then Boom. What you're going to see is the unedited video of what ended up being a podcast episode for the Yarn in case you wanted to watch it. I hope you love it. I hope you enjoy it. Lisa is amazing, talented, phenomenal writer, a gift to children's literature and to the students we serve. So check it out. Hope you love it. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about And Then Boom?
Gosh, where do I start? This book lived in my head for 18 years. 18 years. When I lived in Texas, I lived in Irving and worked in Dallas, and I woke up one morning to hear conversations between Uncle Frankie and Joe, and then conversations between Joe and Mom, and then Joe and Hakeem. And if you've ever been to Dallas, you know the traffic is bananas. And so I'm loving this. And I know that there are certain things that have to happen. And I'm like, can you just be quiet till I get to my desk and then I can type this all in? And they wouldn't. So I just kind of kept listening and kept trying to memorize things. And then I got to my office and I typed it out real quick. But at the time, I was working on a historical fiction book that no one's seen yet. So I put them aside. I'm like, okay, Joe, Hakeem, Mom, Uncle Frankie, you're gonna have to be aside for a while. And then I went to take care of my mom, and then I wrote Starfish. So I was like, oh, finally, I get to tell this story. And Nick got added along the way. Mrs. Swan was added along the way. I mean, I knew there would need to be a teacher, but I decided to make it after my teacher. But basically, Joe is living in poverty. He has a very unreliable mother who's in and out and in and out of his life. And he likens it to a jack in a box. She pops in, she pops out, she pops in, she pops out. And she makes his life very stormy. She is stormy herself. She doesn't have great social emotional learning skills or the ability to like be who she should be. And so he's left with grandmom all the time. And that storm never ends. Like he's always battling the storms of mom. And that's why the tornado scene is so important, I think, because as you've read it, I'm trying not to give too much away. So if you've read the tornado scene, you know that there's flashbacks to mom. And I'm trying to tie it all in together how he literally and figuratively has all these storms he has to deal with in life, and they're just one and then boom after another. And an and then boom is one of those moments where something happens you never expected, and then boom, it changes everything. And yeah, an and then boom can be a great thing, I guess. Like if you win the lottery, and then boom, you win the lottery. But most of the time, and then booms are not so good.
Mm-hmm.
And then boom, you lose your job, and then boom, you have to move, and then boom. And so I just wanted to show children, because there's so many people living in poverty, and with the skyrocketing costs of rent and housing and groceries and basic cost of living, it's just escalating, not just in America but worldwide, especially across the world. I mean, we think we have it bad, but poverty is even worse in a lot of other countries. And I know that a lot of kids are dealing with this. This is their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I want them to feel seen and heard, but I want the people who are not dealing with this
Mm.
to understand what it's like to be a Joe. Because I think so many times that you just don't get how bad it can be
Yeah.
to live that life if you've never lived it. And I also think people need to know in case they ever experience it later, because just because you are growing up with parents who can provide for you doesn't mean that once you grow up, you're going to be able to provide for yourself. And so, poverty can happen at any time. Just because you've never been in poverty doesn't mean you will ever be in poverty. And I really wanted people to understand what that life is like. And I think it all came together with those key characters. His best friends come to his side. He's got a grandmom who cares about him. He's got a teacher who sees the lack of uh, equality and equity too, for people in poverty, and she's doing whatever she can to help them. And so that's what it's all about. It's about those and then moments and the stormy moments and how to deal with them. And I loved using the comic book issues and the superheroes to help tell that story.
So you have this idea, and then almost 2 decades pass. Now it's time to revisit it. What do you do first? Like, what is the process once you're back with Joe?
Just because had been in my head so long doesn't mean Joe and I weren't talking all that time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was really, periodically, like if I would see a TV show about poverty or read an article about poverty, I was a journalist for years and I wrote stories about poverty. I'd be thinking about Joe, and I'd be thinking, okay, what kinds of things? And I remember driving around town. I was actually covering another story, but I had to go by this mobile home park on my way back to the office. And I drove and I found the mobile home park I thought would be his. And it was yellow with a
Mm.
bust, and you could tell they had painted it brown before. And so it just looked like me, like an overripe banana. And so I knew where he lived. I was always thinking about the book, even though, so it wasn't like I had to like go back and pick up. It was, okay, now I've got all the pieces. Let's figure out a way to put them together. And the hardest part for me was I got a little lost in the weeds on grief
Mm.
because I was writing it as my mom died and after she died.
Okay.
And so, having a great editor like Nancy Polson, she's like, okay, yes, he needs to grieve, but we need to pull back on that grief and focus more on Joe. And so had that little bit of a problem, but that's just life.
So why will did you create this book as a novel in verse?
I never create books intentionally as a novel in verse.
Okay.
It's a matter of characters come to me in verse.
Okay.
Um, and so far, I'm working on book 3 now. It's also going to be a novel in verse, but I like my historical fiction. I think it's going to stay in prose.
Okay.
It's currently in prose, um, but it's just based on the characters' needs and
Mm.
how they tell their story to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you have these stories, this historical fiction story, you have Joe's story, you had Starfish. Like, do you have like a ton of stories that are bouncing around in your head that you carry with you always and they always pop in? Or is it just like a couple? I'm so curious how many stories are in Lisa's head right now,
Oh my gosh. Well,
if you had to guess.
yeah, if I had to guess, I'm going to quickly add. I'm not really great at math, so give me a minute. One, two, three, four, probably eight.
That's
Eight.
a lot.
Yeah, but I've had more than that before.
Okay.
And then and little ones are coming because I really want to write a picture book someday.
Uh-huh.
So if you include those, it's closer to 12. And I want to write a couple of adult books as well. So then you're talking like 15. But they bounce around in my head. And it's funny because I love the way you said that. Because there were times when I was working on Starfish and Joe would show up and I'd go, come on, Ellie's busy, leave Ellie alone. But I would have to pop up that
Mhm.
book and write down a few things just to get Joe to quiet down so I could focus again on Starfish. And so that happens to me. I can never write one story at a time. And I
Mm.
don't know why. I guess it's because I don't think most writers do. But I know I don't, mostly because I started out as a journalist. I was a journalist
Okay.
forever. And I had to write at least, we had a quota. I had to write at least 14 stories
A week?
a week. So, and if you were gone on vacation, you had to have those 14 banked before you left. So, it was pretty crazy. And then you also
Whoa.
had the situation of, breaking news things like we had a tornado. So you're doing the 14 plus the tornado. You know what I mean? And so I have all these ideas from that perspective.
Hmm.
And I was used to juggling and going back and forth. Like you're working on this story and you're waiting for someone to call you back to do an interview, so you start on another story. And so I don't think I think most writers have several at least in their head.
Yeah. Do you like to write?
I love to write.
I could tell. I felt like I my last interview was with Jennifer Shalenko, and she loves to write too. So
Yes.
what is it that it seems like your life just kind of revolves around story and writing? Like what is it about writing that you love?
Oh gosh, so much. One of the things I like is just storytelling, period. I love to tell stories. I'm the type that if I'm in a social environment, I'm always the person telling stories, things that I've seen, things I've experienced. And I'm also a joke teller. So I love to tell stories in all forms. And, um, and then I love the freedom writing gives me. Like
Mm,
all of a sudden, I'm creating this character who I've never met in real life, and I make the person come to life as if they're just as real as you are to me. And that's the magic. And then when words flow together, that's like magic to me. And sometimes I'm writing and, words just start coming and I'm like, "Whoa, where did that come from?"
yeah.
And then getting the perfect word choice is always my favorite part of it. When you come up with a word and you're like, I could do better. So I'll put like an XXXXX there, and then I'll come back to it later, and boom, get the perfect word,
And then boom.
and then boom, and um, and then a lot of times I'll have ideas, and I'll either text myself or email myself. And I learned though, and I'll have quotes for a character. I've learned though to put I wrote this because sometimes I write something and I'm like, that was really good. I bet you I didn't write that. I bet you I
Oh,
heard that in a movie. And then I get scared that I'm going to accidentally use somebody else's work. So I'm always like, and then I realize, oh, some of the stuff I come up with 2 o'clock in the morning is really good, and some of it stinks. But it's funny. I've had to say I wrote this just because I'm afraid. But the whole process and just thinking up characters. And here's the other thing I find: I don't. I think it was Anais Nin who said this. You don't live once as a writer. You live twice because you live and then you relive those moments as you're mining for stories and mining for words and experiences. And so, for example, if it's raining, first of all, I love rain, but if it's raining, I'm not just listening to it rain. I'm like, how would I describe that? How would I
mm,
describe that sound? And, when I see leaves on the ground, how would I describe a fallen leaf? How would I describe a leaf that is falling? How would I describe those colors? How would I describe the smells of autumn? And so you're sometimes you live more as a writer than you do as a person.
mm.
I know, like when I got the Prince Award for Starfish, and during the ceremony, I'm not really in the moment. I feel like, how would I describe this if my character is winning? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and it's hard to sometimes stay in the moment for me as a person because I'm always thinking, how would I write about this? How would
Mm.
I write about this?
Now, were there storytellers like people that you knew that told oral storytelling, or was it more with books as a kid? Like, when did you start to really become interested in storytelling and reading and consuming stories, or even telling stories?
One good thing about my mom was that she was an avid reader. And so she subscribed to the newspaper. She didn't buy magazines because we were poor. I grew up very poor. Um, but she would have people who knew she liked them, give them theirs when they were done. She always was generous as she could be with her money when it came to Scholastic Book Fair time. And then she I was always going to the library. Now she didn't like to drive. She didn't learn to drive till right before my dad died, so she was never a confident driver. So she never took me to the public library. But the first place I drove when I turned 16 was the public library
Of course.
because I was like, finally, I can take
Fine.
myself. And but I always used the school library. And she bought an entire set of encyclopedias.
Okay. Okay.
And so whenever I ran out of books or anything to read, I read the encyclopedia. and I still remember certain illustrations and stuff.
Yeah.
I've read A through Z in the encyclopedia. But my grandma was from Northern England.
Okay.
And so I love to listen to her stories about
Oh.
England and what it was like in England. And then on the complete opposite side, my maternal grandmother was Granny, and she was Appalachian. And
Okay.
so you get all of these stories, and then you get they're very superstitious people, and then they would tell you like these kind of ghost stories. Now you never let
Hmm.
a rocker rock unless someone's in it because this will happen,
Yeah.
And what I noticed was when I was listening to stories being told to me, and Mrs. Swan did the best read alouds ever. Um, I never liked anyone to read to me except my mother and Mrs. Swan, because I create the characters in my head and the sounds of their voice and their rhythms. But what I liked about storytelling in general was you can bring characters to life and you can transport someone to another place. And I grew up in a very dysfunctional home as well as a poverty-stricken home, and so I was always looking for ways to escape that home,
Mm.
and I found it through reading
Mm.
because I could be reading a book, Pippi Longstocking, and I'm sailing the seas and I'm seeing
Yeah.
pirates, and I'm nowhere near those fake dangers were totally doable compared to the true dangers I face
Mm.
at home. And so it was like, oh, I'm out there and I win. She always won in the long run.
Yeah.
And all of the stories that I read were all about going away. They were all, and even if I didn't go away physically, like, I mean, like, I'm saying like way too much and I hate to say the word like, but, if I'm not in an island with Pippi Longstocking, I'm still in someone else's home and someone else's life and someone else's skin. And that taught me so much about people. There was a book called Hitty the First 100 Years, and it was about a doll. It won, I think, the Newbery way back when. Very thick book. It was fascinating because it's told from the story, the point of the doll, and all the multiple owners she's had and all this other stuff. And so you get transported into all kinds of
Yeah.
places. And I love that about books and storytelling is the transportation.
Um, in And Then Boom, you do not use the word homeless to describe Joe's situation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
There's a philosophy out there, and I totally agree with it, that your home is where you are. So no one is ever homeless, but it's the unhoused.
Hmm.
Because you can live in a park, you could live under a bridge, that's still home. You can live in your car, that's still home. And I know as a journalist, I interviewed people who were unhoused, and they were living under a bridge in our town because we had we had two um, homeless shelters, which I hate that they call themselves homeless shelters. So I normally just say shelters, but they had two shelters. One was for men, and one was for women with children. And here they had lost everything. They just had the clothes on their backs. And there was a husband and a wife, and then one of their mothers. And so they weren't no children involved, but they were like, we would rather live under a bridge than lose each other
Mm.
because they would be
Okay.
separated. Two would live in one place and one would live in another. They said, we've lost everything else. We're not going to lose ourselves.
Mm.
And you get this perspective of how they see things. And I thought, of course. I mean, my gosh, if you've lost everything, the last thing you want to lose is each other.
Yeah.
And so, under a bridge does not sound like a pleasant place to live, but it's more pleasant than losing your people and your love, the people you love. And so that was their home. Under the bridge was their home. They had a home. They went to it every day. But it wasn't a house. It wasn't a sheltered place like an apartment, a
Mm.
mobile home, a house. And so I think that's a very big distinction to make because, like I said, everybody is home.
Yeah.
Everybody is always home. But do you have a place to live that is
Yeah.
stable and steady and safe?
So, I have a weird question, but
Sure.
so you're living these two lives. You're experiencing a moment
Hmm.
as a person physically there and then as a writer. How would you write these last 20 minutes? Like what's like one thing you would put in there?
Oh my
Does that
gosh.
make any sense?
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Okay.
Um, First of all, I would describe you, the fact that you have your baseball hat and your headphones on,
Uh-huh.
right? And the backdrop of your school behind you, your classroom. And I would talk about how teachers observe and how readers read and how it all comes together and how two people are sharing a love for reading and literature.
Mm,
And so I would just start intertwining that. But I think the central message of the story would be the fact that people are talking about people who need homes and why it's important, and how people can agree that something needs to be done and why it needs to be
mm,
done. Because I think we can all agree that's not a good situation and poverty is horrible. There's no, there's not a, oh, yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's fine if people go home. No one says that.
yeah.
But it would be about the moment where people are talking to try to get other people talking.
Mhm. The last question that I ask everyone,
Mhm.
what is your hope for and then boom?
My hope for And Then Boom is that the people who are dealing with poverty realize there's more resources out there than you think. Sometimes they're harder to find, and it can be frustrating because there's often waiting lists and so forth. But if you need help, it is okay to say you need help.
Mm,
And you should say you need help because there are people willing to help. Um, I myself struggled to ever ask for help my whole life, just growing up in poverty and dysfunction. Asking for help, that was a foreign concept to me because you learn you just have to survive and deal with whatever life throws at you, but you don't. And if you think about comic books, and you think the comic books, what I love about them, Superman, strong as can be, but he's got kryptonite to deal with.
mm,
Wonder Woman, strong, powerful, lots of skills. She still has her weaknesses. And so I think that we see that no matter who you are, you need other people's help. There's no person who gets through this life without asking or needing for help. And so I definitely want people to feel like they can feel free to ask for help and they don't have to be strong all the time, and that other people can be strong with them and for them. And then I want people who've never experienced this, who go home every day and there's food in the kitchen to snack on after school. And they know that they're going to have dinner tonight. And they know that if they want a snack before bed, they'll have that too. I want them to realize that there are kids who come home and there's nothing in the refrigerator. They don't know if they're having dinner tonight. Their next meal might be the free breakfast at school tomorrow. And what that makes you feel like, how grumpy you get when you're hungry, or
mm,
how it literally physically makes you weak. And I want people to just start realizing not only their truths, but other people's truths, and that they can help each other.